Who was here last time? Raise your hand. Okay, so keep your hand raised if you did any of the game plan. So I gave you some action steps last time. It was all about, taking your own initiative in your own study, your own discipleship. Anybody? Bueller? One guy. Thank you. Okay, keep it up. The rest of you guys, hopefully what I say today will give you some extra motivation, push you in that direction. I think that's really important. So I have titled this talk today, Live Not by Lies. Okay, it's actually not a phrase that I came up with. It's got a long historical pedigree. It's actually a book title by that name. A book came out recently, a really good book. So I'm going to steal the title because I think it applies to what I have to say to you today. And my text for today, you guys don't need to turn there. I'll just read it to you. It's a Bible verse that I actually brought up briefly last time. And so I want to bring it up again because, what I said last time and this time is going to connect. So Colossians 2, verse 8. Maybe it's familiar to you. I don't know. So Colossians 2, verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on the human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. So I'm going to come back to that a couple times throughout. What I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to tell you guys my life story. I'm going to share how I came to know the Lord. I'm going to, bring some lessons out of that. And then about halfway through, we're gonna do a little more role play. You guys want that? I think that'll fire things up a little bit. Hopefully get the energy going in this daylight savings room. And then we will land the plane and debrief and bring some lessons from all that kind of tied all together. Sound good? Okay. So, start from the beginning here. I grew up in, I wouldn't say it's a Christian home. I would put it as, I grew up in a religious home. And there is a difference. I did go to church pretty consistently when I was really young. My mom took me and my sister to church almost every week. But as I got older, sports took over, your stereotypical kind of middle class American priorities took over and, went less and less as I got into middle school and high school just because, you have a competition Saturday nights in sport and then you want to sleep in Sunday morning, things like that. That's kind of how I live. If you were to ask me what I believed, what I was taught, pretty simple. I was taught and I believe that God does exist. He wants you to be nice and fair to each other, and that's pretty much the end of it. I believed that the goal in life is to feel good and to be happy, to feel good about yourself. I believe that good people go to heaven when they die, and that was pretty much my spiritual set of beliefs. And how it worked out, I really wasn't taught this, but how it worked out the day-to-day is you bring God out when he's needed in an emergency. He's kind of like a back pocket God. So you kind of just live your life day-to-day, but when you need him in a pinch, like, especially when you got a sports competition coming up and you want to win, a lot of prayer right before that. But then otherwise, you kind of put them back in your pocket and didn't really come into my day-to-day thought. That was just kind of like my life. And then if he's needed, you break the glass and put him back when you're done needing him. So that was kind of like how I grew up. Now, all that began to change right about when I was your age. So junior year of high school. I started to figure out that my group of friends weren't very good friends to me. Like they were the hard partiers, and if I didn't, kind of toe their line and do what they did, or if I didn't approve of what they did, if I was even remotely uncomfortable with it, they would give me a really hard time. They really weren't there for me if I wasn't doing exactly kind of the things that they were doing. And so that plus a little brush with death kind of shook me up. I'm not going to go into that story, but I did kind of have not a near-death experience, but I came pretty close. All right, and that combined with the friend turmoil just kind of shook me up. And it wasn't a conscious search, but I began to kind of subconsciously, yearn for more. Like, all right, what else is out there? And so I started hanging out with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Anybody know that group, know the title? Okay. So there's a FCA chapter on a lot of school campuses. There's actually one on the school campus that I work at. And I started hanging out with them. And it was because they were, they opened their arms to me, and I was looking for friends at that time. And honestly, it was because of a girl, too. There was this really cute girl that was a leader in FCA, and I had a giant crush on her. So to kind of impress her, I started going to meetings. And I got one date with her, right? She wasn't interested after that. But I got Jesus in the end, so I think the trade-off was worth it. She'd probably agree, too. But anyway, that's the first time that I heard the gospel message. Or maybe that's not the first time I heard it, but that was the first time that I paid attention to it, right? I have no idea if I heard it before. I wasn't listening. But I can actually remember where I was. I can remember it was summer between my junior and senior year of high school. I can remember the exact place. I can remember who was giving the message. And the first time I heard anything about a relationship with Jesus, first time I heard anything about, like, my spiritual resume wasn't good enough, that my works weren't going to cut it. First time I considered that maybe if I died right then and there that I would go to hell. I'd never really considered that. I always thought that was good enough. And so I was like, I probably need to think about this. And so I did. I sat on it for a long time. I sat on it for like 8-9 months. And was kind of chewing on it and dragging my feet. And then right around spring of my senior year of high school, that's kind of when I crossed the line. So I can't remember a time when I officially, before this moment I was not a Christian, and then after that moment I was, praying a prayer, that sort of thing. It wasn't like that. It was a long process. But if I kind of had to pinpoint it, it was right around that time, like tail end of my senior year of high school. Okay. Now, that was high school. And then I get to college, my freshman year of college, brand new believer, really green, wet behind the ears. You had to show me where the book of John was. That's how much knowledge I lacked. Okay, so that's me in college. But then there were a few very key turning points when I was in college, right that first year, that made all the difference. So one of those key turning points was I actually literally bumped into, my first week there, bumped into two upper class Christians. They were named Johann and, ironically, Darwin. But they got me plugged into a really good church. And they got me plugged into some good parachurch ministries there, like InterVarsity, Campus Crusade, those kind of groups. And that was my first week there. So if I didn't run into those guys, I don't know if that would have happened. All right? And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. The second thing, because it's kind of an ironic thing. Like, you'd think, like, God used this guy in your life. Well, yes. My roommate, my freshman year of college, was a 300-pound gay man named Rocky. So I shared that at Cottonwood Creek last week. I was doing a talk, and one guy in the audience was like, "Man, that sounds like a lot." It's like, that was a lot. But Rocky was a good guy. We got along. We were good friends. But the thing is, he was an agnostic. He was very smart. We would have these conversations about religion and spirituality. And he would ask me questions I didn't know how to answer. He would poke holes and bring challenges to my belief system that I didn't know how to handle. And it got to the point where it was kind of it came to a head. Where I was like, all right, I've got to find answers to what this guy says, or I'm out of here. Not out of here in the sense like I'm moving out of the dorm, but I'm out of Christianity. I didn't want to believe a placebo, or it was something that was just, that was helping me live my life, but it wasn't really connecting to reality or true reality or anything like that. I didn't want that. All right, so it's like I got to find answers to this guy's questions. So fortunately, by that time, I was being mentored by some older male believers who took my question seriously. They didn't say just have faith. They didn't, throw some Bible verses at me and tell me just to believe the word. They actually helped me out and pointed me in the right direction, giving me some good answers to my questions. Okay, so, but Rocky was used by God to push me in that direction. I don't know if I would have done that otherwise. And then the third turning point was kind of a related thing, kind of happened around the same time. I actually went to a debate on God's existence right around October, early November. And going into it, I was really nervous. So, I had the stereotypes like, the atheists, they're the science people, they're the people of facts. And Christians, we're just about faith. And so how's this going to work out? Is this Christian guy going to get his clock cleaned by this atheist? That's kind of how I thought it was going to happen. I was really nervous about it. But I went to the debate, And it was actually quite the opposite. There's this world-renowned atheist physicist in this debate, and he really didn't have much of an answer for what this Christian guy was saying. Like, the Christian guy had arguments and good evidence and, good science and stuff. And so I came away from that debate. It's like, all right, let's go. Maybe there's something to this. Maybe Christianity can stand toe-to-toe with other ideologies and come out ahead. And like, it wasn't like the decisive thing, but it gave me a good shot in the arm, and it gave me some courage to think like, all right, maybe I can make it. Maybe I can make it. And so after that, just kind of took off. There were a lot of other key turning points, but those were 3 in my first couple months at college that made a big difference. Okay, so let me bring some takeaways here, some lessons for you guys. All right, I could have easily gone the other way. I could have easily been a statistic. I think last time I mentioned the stats are that 60 to 80% of young Christian students, depending on the survey, within a year or two of going to college, they walk away. So do the math here. All right, now that could have been me. I could have been one of those numbers. But quite the opposite happened. My faith was resilient. So that's the key word, resilience. So the key question is how? How did I survive the madness of crowds that I talked about last time? How did I survive that social pressure that I talked about last time? It's kind of like tacitly in the air. It's like everywhere you go, this is what the smart people think, and Christian, you're the opposite of that. So, how did I survive that kind of pressure? Okay, there's a couple of things, all right, and they're all connected to some of the themes that I touched upon in my last message last time I was here. Number one is I had a really good community. Okay, I had roots in a biblical community, and that is vastly important for you guys when you go off on your own. Okay, the Bible knows nothing of Lone Ranger Christianity. If you just kind of try to float along business as usual when you get to college, you're going to be a goner within a couple of months. All right, so you need, well, let me put it this way. I was around non-believers, okay, all the time. And that's good. That's standard. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, to influence the world, you got to be in the world, right? Can I get a nod that you guys are there? Man, this is like talking to a painting. I'm telling you. So that's gonna be your life, but you need to have roots in a good biblical community. And I don't just mean hanging out with a few Christian buddies at a coffee shop. I mean putting down roots in a church that takes the Bible seriously. It's got a high view of the Bible, and a church that has a lot of gray hairs in it. Okay, because you're going to need older mentors, and don't expect them to come to you. You take the initiative and go to them. And I'm also not just talking about attending on a Sunday, but really digging in, going to a Bible study consistently, serving in the church, doing that when you don't feel like it, when it's not convenient. So getting your butt up every Sunday morning and going to the Bible study when you would rather watch Netflix or play video games with your buddies in the dorm, putting your discipleship ahead of convenience. You're going to need to do that in the community because that's going to be your life raft. I was on the wrestling team when I was in college, and the wrestling team was full of really hard partiers that wanted nothing to do with religion and Christianity, and so they mocked me pretty mercilessly about my commitment. And so that biblical, having that good band of brothers was something that I could lean on when that mocking got to me. And it's a good resource for when I was getting those challenges in my classes, when I was trying to deal with the doubt that comes with transition. You guys are going to be on your own, and that's going to kind of throw you for a loop in your head for a lot of you. And so again, if you're just kind of out on your own and you're trying to foot it without having that biblical community, that's going to be tough. That's going to be a hard road to hoe, and you're not going to be able to do that. Okay, so that's the first thing. Secondly, is prioritizing a life of the mind. Okay, this was the main point of last time. I did study in my classes. I did all the reading in my class. Well, I didn't say all the reading. A little reading in my classes. But you have to study outside of that too. Okay? I know the stereotype of apologetics is that it's just for the eggheads. as just the guys that are really good at it or are gifted at it, but really it's for everybody. Because at least for me, and probably for you when you get to college or when you get to the adult world, that's going to be a life raft. I had to cling to that to survive because that's where I found the answers to the things that I was getting thrown at every single day. So the life of the mind and the study that I'm talking about, it's part and parcel. It's a necessary part of your discipleship. It's not just for, the few nerds that want to get into that. All right, so I'm trying to get you to ditch that stereotype. And then number 3, habit. Realize this isn't a fly-by-night thing. This isn't something where you go to a Christian camp, as wonderful as those are, you have a high mountain experience, you feel energized, and you come home, and what happens 2 weeks later is you're kind of back to status quo, right? This is just a very quiet, very consistent habit over time. That's how you build your mind. You don't build it in a flash in the pan. So if you remember the game plan that I was talking about a couple weeks ago, you don't have to go and get a PhD. So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by this. Just a little bit every day, if you do it consistently, it makes a huge difference. So, find those little parts of your day where you can use that time a little more wisely and use that for study. So rather than watching Netflix at night when you go to bed, take that half an hour instead of watching that show, read a book. When you drive, who drives to school here? Anybody? Okay, a couple people. When you drive to school, you drive to work, use that time instead of listening to music, pop in an audiobook. Okay? 20, 30 minutes a day, you do that every day over a couple years, that's going to make a huge difference in your courage and your confidence. That's going to be the fruit of it. The fruit of it's going to be resilience. The fruit of it's going to be courage. The fruit of it's going to be confidence. When you get into conversations with people, you're not going to be so tongue-tied. You're going to know how to handle those conversations. Okay, you're not going to be so agitated and nervous because, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. I don't want to make conversations out to be a battle, but you get the metaphor right. Okay, the more that you train, the easier the life is going to be. Okay, and then lastly is I was pushed to own my faith, and I know this is something that Nathan talks about a lot. Okay, I couldn't live a vicarious faith through my parents or through my youth pastor. I had to take initiative myself. Now, I'm not saying that you got to do all this yourself. You got to bear your burdens yourself. Remember, I talked about community. So, pastors, mentors, all other believers, you do it together, right? And we all have a helping hand. But all I'm saying is that, you got to be the one to take initiative. You got to be active. Okay, you can't simply say, well, my parents are Christians, it's how I've been raised, and so that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. Everybody around me is a Christian. You got to put more sweat equity into it. Okay, that's how growth in discipleship works. Making sense? I'm speaking English to you guys? Okay. All right. What I'm going to do right now is shake things up a little bit. Last time I did a longer role play, about 25 minutes. Today, we're just going to do 10 minutes. Maybe less than that. All right, so I'm going to put these glasses on. I'm going to go into role play mode. And this time, don't assume that I'm an atheist. Because I might not be. I might actually be somebody in the crowd here. I might be somebody that believes in God. All right, so I'm going to start things off, and you guys fire back at me as best you can. And the topic today in this role play is going to be a little spicy, so I don't know how you're going to handle it. We'll see. You guys ready? Okay, here we go. All right, so I had this conversation with my students the other day, and I want to share it with you, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Okay? The whole subject of preferred pronouns came up. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say preferred pronouns? Okay. And there were some fundamentalist Christians in my class that had a problem with that. They're like, I don't know if I want to use somebody's preferred pronouns in conversation and addressing them. And what I said to them was, look, this is just a basic matter of respect. Doesn't harm you at all. Just pronouns, no skin off your back. But it affirms the other person's identity. It affirms who they are, and it celebrates their dignity. And that is something that you guys get every day, cisgender people. But this is something that they don't get a whole lot. So it's really nice when somebody else, especially somebody that comes from your church background, can just acknowledge that basic humanity and allow them to be themselves and be who they are in your presence. And so that's what I shared with the students who were pushing back. And that's what I want to share with you guys. So, what do you think? What say you? Tell you what, cat's got your tongue. Turn to a partner. Go ahead and make eye contact with somebody right now, but not in an awkward way. So that you know you got a partner. I want to get you guys talking. And just brainstorm a response. So you're having this conversation. I'll come out of character for a little bit. You're having this conversation in the class. Teacher brings this up. It's just a matter of basic respect. What do you say? What do you think? Take about 60 seconds to share with somebody, and then I want you guys to tell me what you think.
I'm not really sure. I don't know. I mean, the idea of forming positions like a fake identity. It's hurting them. I don't know how you get them to obviously in the garden.
Okay, let's come back. You guys gave me that deer in headlights look. You had no clue that I was going to run with that this morning, did you? So you're like caught a little by surprise. But you've had a little bit of time to talk about it with a partner. So let's get a hand or two, brave person to get a response here. Go ahead, Mr. Lumberjack.
I don't want to conform with the world. I respect who you are, but I do not agree with it. So I'll maybe call you by your name, but I'm not going to say your preferred pronouns because I don't agree with it.
So, what does it harm you, though? I mean, I know you say you don't agree with it. If you have personal hang-ups about it, that's fine, but why would you foist that on the other person and, force them to live as somebody that they're not? I guess it's not just a difference of opinion. We're not talking about LeBron or Kobe, who's the king. We're talking about their fundamental identity.
Next question. So,
no, I mean, I'm going to get your response.
I have a response.
If you want to think about it, that's fine. Okay, go ahead.
So, when someone has some preferred pronouns that are in contradictory to what they are, like, say, I'm having a conversation with someone who I would presume to be, let's say, male, but they prefer to be identified as female. If I presume them to be male when they prefer to be identified as female, then, doesn't that kind of, say who they, are, rather than who they prefer to be?
Well, we're not just talking about preferences here. Okay, this is something that they've lived with for a long time. And so if you're going to, what you're doing is called misgendering. Okay, you are addressing them as a gender that they are not. And when you do that, what you're saying to them is, I know who you are better than you do. And nope, I don't treat you that way. And so why would they don't treat you that way. Why would you treat them that way? It's just it all comes back to respect. It's kind of, you're acknowledging somebody's basic humanity and giving them something that you are privileged to have every single day. Think about it. Okay. We have a hand over here. Then I think we had a hand over here. A couple guys. All right, go ahead.
Okay. I think, it's technically more respectful to, say someone's pronouns. It's the easier way to do it. This issue goes a lot bigger, I think, than just, someone's respect. when you deny your basic biology, you also deny like sex-based rights when it comes to women and men. So if a man can just say that they become a woman, then that really gets rid of what it means to be a woman. And being a woman isn't based on stereotypes, or being a man isn't based on stereotypes, it's based on your biological sex. And so if you just let people live in this illusion that you can just become a woman if they're a man, it disintegrates actual women's identity and what it means to be a woman, I think. Or same with men. I mean, I focus on women because
Right. Well, a couple of things here. I think you're making it more complicated than it is. I think this is a little bit more simple thing. First, basic definitions. All right, you're talking biology. I'm not talking biology. I'm talking gender. And you know because you've had these conversations in school. There's a difference. Okay. Gender identity is separate from plumbing, so I'm not really concerned with that. I'm just concerned with acknowledging someone's basic humanity, right to be who they are, to be free to be themselves. And that doesn't erase women. You can still use a women's bathroom. You can still play in a women's team in sports. That affects you not at all. But it does affect them, because not giving them this courtesy is forcing them to live a lie, in fact.
well, one, that's not technically true, because if you allow people who identify as a woman to play in women's sports or to be in women's bathrooms, then that causes an issue for women itself, because they're technically biologically stronger as a woman or as a man pretending to be a woman, and then also men tend to commit more violence technically than women, so you're allowing men to go into the women's restroom. You can't pretend to be a woman, it's still biologically a man.
That's quite a stereotype.
But it's statistically true. You can look at FBI crime statistics, and men commit more violence than women. So it does affect more than just their personal gender identity. It has a bigger effect on people than just someone's basic human
Gentlemen,
rights.
how you feel that she's describing you in that way?
It's just true, though.
I mean, look, okay, two things. So, number one, again, simpler than you're making it out to be. Okay, even if you're a transgender person, women compete with other women. Men compete with other men. If you're identifying, all those who identify as women, they get to compete together. It's real simple. Those who are women gender compete in the women's division. Nothing too complicated about that. In terms of, I forget everything else you said. I just had a brain fart. Anyway, that was the main point that I wanted to say. Oh yeah, here's the second point. A lot of what you say is, my response is that's really easy for you to say. As a person with cisgender privilege, it's really easy for you. I mean, you guys chuckle at that, but it's easy for you to dismiss their lived reality and just they're just asking for something very basic. Just an acknowledgement of their identity, which is something that you get every single day and you're taking for granted. Okay? I'll give you the last word.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Because playing into that delusion affects a lot more than just their personal preferences. I mean, just even with legislation in general, like Biden, he put in an executive order to identify people based on their gender identity rather than their actual sex, and now men can play in women's sports or women can play in men's sports. It has a bigger effect than just their personal pronouns. The whole issue itself.
Right, I'll give you the last word on that. Let's go over here. We got about 2-3 more minutes, and then we're gonna do something else. Go ahead.
In my personal opinion, I believe that when you use somebody's, just technically speaking, against my views as a gender identity thing, I believe that a male should be a male and a woman should be a woman. And so when I say that, let's say that there's a biological man talking to me and he prefers to be called a woman. Let's say I refer to him as a woman, I am essentially, at least in my opinion, showing a form of support for what he's doing and what his decision is, and I don't support that. So it's kind of going against what I support as an empire.
That'd be nice if you did support it. People support you in your gender identity every day. Again, I think you guys are taking for granted something that you get every day, and therefore you just might not recognize the value of it. Look, I agree with you. Men are men. Women are women. I completely agree. Just acknowledge that when, a transgender person is addressing you. Real simple. Okay? Real simple. It's just basic respect. You gotta let them be themselves. Man. You gotta let them be themselves. They don't, what's your name? Sorry?
Camden.
Camden. That's your name. They don't dead name you. Why would you do that to them?
Because that's my actual name.
Yeah. Yeah. And same goes for them. Right? Don't dead name somebody. Real simple. All right, let's get one or two more. Go ahead.
A couple pieces of clarification to Hans' question. Are you also referring to stuff outside of he and she, like they, zer, stuff like that?
Sure, let's go there.
Okay. And why don't women try out for the NBA?
Why don't women try out in the NBA?
Pump the video NBA.
Because they can't make it.
Mm-hmm.
They can compete. But a man can compete in a women's sport because he can outclass him.
Sure.
So.
Okay. You had a question?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to address that. Right now, you're attacking the point of traditional perspective. So we are basically in what society was accepting, especially just like nearly like 5 or 10 years ago. So right now, you basically have the burden of proof. So you will need to prove your side in this because this right here, what we are believing is basically the norm. So you'll have to come up with a point to prove that part. So that being said, I think I have a few follow-up questions, but what would you define truth as?
Why does that matter? We're talking about like basic respect. It seems like a huge rabbit trail to me.
So why
I mean, truth is simple. That which corresponds to reality. Okay, good.
okay,
Here we go.
That which corresponds to reality. So taking gender, we're talking about DNA and RNA. So why can you just say suddenly that you completely contradict what your DNA says? Like a lot of transgender people generally have all their appendages and their cells, at least the ones that haven't been inserted externally, still contain biological DNA that says something different about their gender than what you're saying.
Okay.
So,
I gotta cut you off here because we're running short on time. But just a quick answer to that is, look, again, it kind of goes back to what my answer to her. We're not talking biology here. Sex and gender are two completely different things. Sex, biology, gender, someone's perception of who they are. Okay, and it runs to very deep core matters of their identity. And this is why, this is one of the reasons, this pushback that I'm getting from you guys, which I really don't get the resistance because it doesn't really harm you at all to use someone's preferred pronouns. This is one of the reasons why the suicide rate is so high in that community. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but this is one. It's because they just get this kind of pressure from outward society all the time. And they are not free to live who they are. Again, come back to the theme, basic thing of identity. All right, coming out of character. That got a little response out of you. My testimony, you guys are like this kind of dead. That got you awake a little bit. All right, so what I want to do here is, for the rest of the time, there's two different things going on here. Number one is how to handle this in conversation. Okay, number two is ideologically unpacking the ideas that kind of came up in that role play. All right, I'm going to address the second, and I'm going to leave the first B, because that's a whole nother thing. How to have a conversation with somebody like this and it not get, and have it be a productive conversation. That is, me and Nathan were talking about it beforehand, that is an art, that is a skill that is built over time. That is a whole, not just a whole nother sermon, but that is a whole nother teaching series to help you guys have better conversations with people like that. Okay, so I'm going to leave that be, and I'm going to talk about how to work this out in your own head. Okay, I'm actually not going to talk about the whole transgender thing. I'm not really even going to deal with gender. I'm going to go more fundamental than that, because what animates that whole conversation, what generates those preferred pronouns ideas, transgender and sports, all that stuff, is something way, way, way farther downstream. It's actually a set of ideas that you guys have probably bought into. All right? A lot of you probably have adopted these ideas that I'm about to unpack in some way, shape, or fashion because you live in American culture. Okay? So I'm going to go to the fundamentals. We're going to unpack that, and then we're going to be done. Make sense? Okay. So where does all this come from? And how does it relate to my testimony? I think that's a good question that I'm going to answer at the end. What we fail to see a lot of times is these conversations, it's not just a matter of like loosening morality or a matter of inclusion or the LGBTQIA rainbow. It actually has to do with how we view the self and how we view identity. Okay? And these set of ideas, they have, different authors have called them different names. Like one guy calls it expressive individualism. It doesn't really matter what you call it. What matters is the ideas themselves. Okay, so here are some pretty fundamental ideas that our culture, it's really, really popular in our culture, and you guys have probably bought into. How do we see the self? How do we see identity? Well, I am my own. I am the authority on me. Period. Full stop. You guys are the authority on yourselves. Nobody tells you who you are but you. That's kind of the way that our culture thinks about it. Okay? It's the you do you mentality. Don't let anybody tell you you can do something or can't do something. Don't let anybody tell you who you are. When it comes to figuring out your identity, you look to one place. Where is that? Yeah, you look inward and you consult your own desires, and then that is the compass for your identity. You don't look up. You don't look outward to the community. You just look within. Okay? The you do you attitude. Here's how one author puts it. I am a commodity wholly owned and operated by myself in service to my own interests as defined by me. Personal happiness and freedom is the goal of life. Therefore, society is good only in terms of whether it helps or hinders achieve my personal happiness and whether it helps or hinders me be an autonomous person. Autonomous means independent and free. Okay? So this is the Disney worldview. This is one of the reasons why I say you guys have bought into this. Think about almost every Disney movie that you've seen. This is the theme, where it features some beleaguered and put upon individual whose desires and feelings or what they want somehow is out of step with their family, or it's out of step with their larger society or their town. And so the whole movie is their journey of liberation, of escaping from those judgmental categories and being able to express who they are. Okay, that's another key part of this worldview, is you look inside, you find your identity and your meaning by looking within, and then being real, being authentic, means publicly expressing that. Okay, and so Disney movies, that's the theme. All right, and also it's about the society's gradual journey of realizing, like, hey, we've got this unique individual here. We need to let them express who they are, rather than putting them in a box, that sort of thing. So just a few movies where this applies to: Mulan, Little Mermaid, Addams Family, Zootopia, Brave, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Frozen. Any of those you guys' favorite movies, or at least that was one of your favorite movies as a kid? I know for my kids, right? Not to be cheesy about it, but this is even the theme of, Amazon's latest movie, Coming to America, right? It's a comedy, it's kind of funny, but you think about it, that's the movie, right? The king used to be this unique individual, but lately he's kind of gotten stuck in a rut because he's trying to defend tradition. Tradition in that movie is the bad guy. That's what he's trying to escape from. And then the prince, that's what he's trying to escape from too. He's like, I don't know if this royalty thing is for me because it's not who I am. Right? That's the whole movie. Okay, so we watch movies like this, and there's room for a little bit of that in our culture, but this is like the constant drumbeat of the movies that we watch, and so we just kind of take it all in. Right? Raise your hand if you recognize this sort of attitude, this sort of thing in the movies that you watch. Right? It's all over the place. Okay? It's in your classes. It's on social media. Okay? Here, let me just read one stanza from the Disney movie Frozen. Okay? This is Let It Go. You guys can laugh at me, but it's time to see what I can do, to test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. Right? You realize that, like, you listen to those lyrics, you're like, whoa, I didn't know that. Am I running over time?
Oh, no, you're good.
Good? Okay. All right. So that's one idea in our culture that generates that whole preferred pronouns discussion that we had. Then you've got to add the sexuality part of it. Okay? And it all comes down to Freud. I know, stereotypical again. But before Freud, our culture thought of sexuality as like a behavior thing. You know, there's certain desires that I have that direct me to certain sort of behaviors, and that's kind of how we thought of it. Now, after Freud, totally different. Now, those aren't just desires. Those are a core part of who I am. Now it's part of my identity. So your sexual desires and your feelings become like definitive of who you are. And so the upshot is that that's my identity, and I need to be free to express my identity in public rather than, you know, having society's categories kind of put me in a box, right? And anything that puts me in that box, that keeps me from expressing my identity, and again, my sexual desires are a core part of that, anything that keeps me from that, I need to escape from. I need liberation from. That's our culture, okay? That's what generates that whole discussion. You know, it's really not about bathrooms and sports and stuff like that. That is way downstream from all this other stuff. Okay, so in the time that I have left, just a few minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a short evaluation of it, and then I'm going to connect it to my testimony. Okay? Sound good? You guys still with me? Hang in there. All right, hang in there. So where does this go wrong? Where does it go weird? Okay, a couple of things. Number one, it gives a false view of human nature. We're not really good. We're not really designed to create meaning ourselves. We're not like Prometheus. We can't just, by declaration, create an identity and create meaning and then foist that onto reality. We're really small creatures. We're not big enough for that. Okay, so it gives a wrong view of human nature. Number two, some limits are good. Okay, in this expressive individualism, it's all about getting away from limits. But you think about it, you have to live within limits, and that is a good thing. Okay, think about my body. Think about your body. Think about, my maleness is a gift from God. It is something that I'm to accept and honor and cherish and steward and take care of my body, not seek to escape from it because my mental perception is not in line with that. Okay? Your limits, at least some limits, are good. But expressive individualism is all about getting away from limits. Okay? Number three, I know this is kind of going long, guys. Hang in there. Ask some questions. Okay? Why? You ever think about this? Why is looking inside the right place to find your identity? Why is that? And why is being real and authentic mean expressing whatever you find yourself and find inside? Why? I don't know. Okay? Why is that view of authenticity, looking inside and expressing it, why is that better than Jesus' view of authenticity? Dying to self, taking up your cross and following him. You want to live? You want to save yourself? Lose yourself. Why is the modern view of authenticity better than Jesus's? Learn to ask those questions. Okay? Number four, you think about it, it's just plain weird. We know that not all identities are worth having. We know that not all identities are worth expressing. My students say sometimes, you got to be who you are. You do you. And I said, well, yeah, what if you're a jerk? Okay? We realize that some loves aren't worth loving. Some desires aren't worth having. And you don't figure that out by looking inside. You figure that out by looking to a transcendent, an outside source. That's how you figure that out. Okay? So, one author puts it this way. Telling those who aren't virtuous to look inside is like telling them to find a way out of a wilderness using a compass that always points at them. A compass works because it points to something fixed and unchanging, by which we can orient ourselves and find our way. In the same way, unless there is a fixed moral reference point outside of ourselves by which we can make decisions, we'll always be lost. We've told a whole generation to go find themselves. What if they find themselves when they do, they find that they're jerks? Okay, so you can't figure out that whole question by looking within. That's the wrong place to look. All right, you got to look up first. And then lastly, what about the whole sexuality part of it? Okay, so sex does matter, right? It's really important. It's the only act capable of creating new human life. Sacred. All right, so it's not nothing. It's not just a bodily function. But it's also not your identity. Your sexual desires are not your identity. This is what's called a category mistake. It's like asking, what does the color blue weigh? Or it's like trying to weigh a chicken with a yardstick. It's using the wrong category to talk about something. Okay? And talking of your sexual desires as if they were a core part of your identity is the wrong way to talk about it. It's a category mistake. Okay? It's important. It's not. See, our culture is kind of weird. Our culture wants to have it both ways. Our culture wants to insist that sexuality is just a bodily function. But then on the other hand, it wants to insist that it's a core part of your identity. It tries to have it both ways. And that's it can't square that circle. Right? So it's a sacred act. It's an act. It's not your identity. And this is true of everybody. It's not just true of LGBTs. All right? Like I got wayward desires every day. That's not who I am. Okay? Sam Albury said, where's my notes? There we go. He said, desires for things that God has forbidden are a reflection of how sin has distorted me, not how God has made me. So don't buy into the lie that sexual desire is a core part of your identity or anyone's identity, because it's just not. Category mistake. Okay, so that's the few ways this ideology goes wrong. Now, what does this have to do with my testimony? Remember the verse that I talked about at the beginning, Colossians 2:8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. Live not by lies. Okay? That whole role play, that was a hollow and deceptive philosophy. The verse doesn't say to avoid philosophy wholesale, to avoid philosophy per se. Philosophy is just thinking hard about things that matter. All right, that's it. So, can you do that as part of your discipleship? Yes, you should. It's a necessary part of your discipleship. Okay, if you don't do this journey of discovery that I keep bringing up and keep talking about, you're going to be taken in by those lies, because those lies are very intimidating. That role play for you guys kind of caught some of you a little up, right? So do the study, the game plan that I'm talking about, a little bit every day. Do your reading so that you see that hollow and deceptive philosophy for what it is, and you can see it coming, and you're not taken in by it. Okay, you guys are getting ready to be out on your own, so you got to take ownership of this stuff. That's just one. There's a lot of different ways that this manifests. Okay, you want to be resilient. You want to be able to resist those lies that our culture throws at us every single day. You have to put the sweat equity into it. You can't let Nathan do the thinking for you. You can't let your mom and dad do the thinking for you. It's got to be you. Make sense? The fruit of that will be resilience, and the fruit of that will be courage, and the fruit of that will be you're not going to be intimidated in these conversations. You're going to be calm. You're not going to be, it's not going to get your heart racing, because you'll see it coming. You'll know. That takes work. Make sense? Okay. I know I talked a long time. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. All that I ask is that you guys, as you go from today, just think about it and put this in action. Don't be the kind of person who just kind of hears this and then leaves and does nothing about it. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Absolutely. Let me pray for us. Father, you command us to honor you and love you above all else with our heart, our soul, and our minds, with our whole being. Help us to be disciples in that vein, in that manner. Help us to honor you with everything that we have, with our time, with our resources, and with our thinking. As we go from here, whatever questions that we have, put people and resources in our path that we can use to answer those questions, to form our minds, become better disciples, and in the end, to reflect you better and more accurately and more strongly to a dying and hurting world.